Welcome to episode 65 of the Various and Sundry podcast. I'm your host, Matt Harmon, joined live from the Vault Studio on the beautiful campus of Grace College and Theological Seminary by my good friend, my colleague, my co-host, and the man who is even more committed this year to growing grass, John Scott Sloat.
We're getting to grass growing season here. It's about to start. I spent about 45 minutes over the weekend on YouTube looking at grass lawn care stuff. And some people have immaculate yards, like really nice.
Is that your goal?
I don't think so. I just want grass instead of mud.
Okay. All right. I mean, from what I understand, that's a common question you get asked as you're out and about traveling the globe from listeners. When I was in Columbus, they were asking me about grass growing. Yes. So besides your commitment to grass growing, John, what else is going on with you?
So I had a weird moment we had life group at my house last night, and our friend Heidi looks over at me.
Classy Heidi.
She goes, "John, give me the bullet points on the Suez. Is that how it's pronounced?
I believe so. Yeah.
Suez Canal situation." Which, first of all, I did not realize I was her go-to for bullet point information about current event topics.
Okay.
But have had a good week enjoying the Suez Canal. Stuff.
Yeah. It's been funny to see the pictures of that, and pretty remarkable when you think there's this one little in one sense, this Suez Canal is has like 10 to 12% of the world's trade that passes through it. So you block that thing up, and that gets problematic.
And ships are going around the tip of Africa now, and trying to get their trade to Asia and all sorts of things.
Yeah. You see those pictures and you think you had a bad day.
Oh yeah.
How about the guy that was the captain of that ship? Just managing to jam up the Suez Canal.
I saw a headline that said, "Human error thought to be a part of Suez Canal controversy," and I went, "You think?"
What else?
Yeah, what else could have gone wrong here?
Yeah, I mean, what else is going to cause that?
There were some good internet memes out there. Did you see the one of Ken Ham, who of course started the Creation Museum and all those things?
Answers in Genesis.
Yeah, and sitting in front of what originally was the Ark exhibit. So he's sitting in front of the Ark, saying, "Hey, come out and see our new exhibit," or whatever. And instead behind him is the giant boat, the Evergreen or whatever it's called, is behind him, and he's just like, "Hey, come out and see our new exhibit," And it was pretty funny.
Yeah, well, I'm glad that something can make us laugh in these challenging times. Speaking of things that haven't made me laugh, let's talk some NCAA tournament.
Oh my. Yeah, so a couple things over the weekend, at least games that I noticed. UCLA beat Alabama last night.
That was a good game. Did you watch it?
I watched the first 3 quarters of it, yeah, and then it was time for John to go to bed. So
you missed the ending, the end of regulation. Did you hear about it?
I heard that there was a 3-point.
Yeah, so UCLA hit 2 free throws to go up 3. With like 4 seconds left, and Alabama had to inbound the ball, got the ball down to not even one of their best players. Kid only scored these 3 points. He hit a 3 from like 30 feet out, but UCLA failed to foul. They didn't execute their normal strategy of fouling when up 3 late, and so it cost them going into overtime. Of course, in overtime they did just fine and extended that game, but.
So that was my first Final Four team to go down.
Okay,
for me, and then Oral Roberts almost won.
Yeah,
and that was a really good game, and had an open look with time expiring.
Yeah, if you're a basketball guru in terms of the nuts and bolts of drawing up plays and stuff like that, the play that their coach drew up down 2 having to go the full length of the floor with 3.1 seconds left was really well designed to get the ball to their best player. He got 2-3 dribbles to the 3-point line and had a good, clean look that he just couldn't knock down.
Yeah. Any other games you want to bring up? I mean, everything else kind of went as we expected for the most part.
Yeah, in terms of particular games, I don't know if anything else stood out. I mean, as we record on this Monday morning, we're down to the Elite Eight now.
And they're still playing today and tomorrow?
These are, today and tomorrow are in the evening will be when the Final Four gets set. So, I mean, the big picture takeaway for me is the Big Ten absolutely wet their pants and had a terrible tournament.
Yeah.
The Pac-12
came out of nowhere.
Nobody predicted, other than maybe Bill Walton in one of his chemically altered states.
Yes.
Has 3 teams in the Elite Eight.
Wild.
And I think that to me that's the big headline there is the fact. And I also think there was some stat I saw that this was if you sort of average out the seeds left in the Sweet 16, it was the highest it had ever been.
Really?
So
I do think it's funny that everybody's been like, "Oh, this is the year with no blue bloods," all this talk, and then here waltzes UCLA right into the Elite Eight. Yeah,
that's an interesting team though because they came on later in the year.
Sure.
Which it feels like that's the truth of several of these Pac-12 teams that were not necessarily on the national radar, and then have gotten hot at the right time. So that brings us to actually we'll mention this here. It's been an interesting story about Oral Roberts, and their coach has a seminary degree.
Yeah, it's a good time to be a coach. It's a good time to have a seminary degree, right? I mean, there's the guy Frank Reich at the Colts has a seminary degree.
Yes.
This guy at Oral Roberts. I'm sure there are other people out there doing successful things with seminary degrees.
Yes. So, if you're thinking maybe I have a career in coaching on my horizon, why not come to Grace College and Theological Seminary and get your seminary degree?
Absolutely.
I mean –
feels like a no-brainer.
Obviously. Yeah. Yeah. So we should probably talk about the bracket challenge, John.
Yeah. So we got Malachi in Indiana, one of our students who's first right now.
Currently, yeah.
Although I don't think his possible points are super high.
Yeah, I think he's in okay position, but he's still vulnerable to being caught.
Cameron in Georgia seems to be the one with the most possible points. Although I think he has Arkansas in his Final Four, which is a bold pick.
Yes.
But they're still alive, They're still
Zach in Ohio is in third, but it's fool's gold.
Because the possible points are pretty low.
Because his possible points are pretty low. So, and shout out to my wife who is in sixth. But you are in ninth.
I'm in ninth, yep.
Still in contention.
Mm-hmm. I have a good number of possible points left still.
You do.
Yeah.
You do. And I am in 14th. And so I think I am outside the realm of possibility of winning it.
Okay.
But my goal is not to win. My goal is not to finish last.
Yes, and that spot's already claimed.
That spot has been claimed in our
We're not going to name names here, but that spot is claimed.
I do know that one of my sons was desperately nervous early because he was flirting with the basement there and ended up he's guaranteed now not to finish dead last.
Yeah. Yeah, that was a bold pick to go Texas Tech in the Final Four,
I mean, the last time we had a tournament, they were national runner-up. So, Anyway. Also, we didn't have this on the rundown here, but quickly, IU hired a new coach. Did you see this?
Yes. Mike Woodson.
Yes.
I'm kind of excited. I mean, I don't really pay attention to IU basketball that much, but I like Mike Woodson.
Yeah, former Knicks coach.
Who got fired in Phil Jackson coming in, and that was all very political. It wasn't because of his coaching. Mm-hmm. Guys always played hard for him. He's a defensive-minded coach. I'm excited to see what he does.
Yeah. Another weird wrinkle in that story is the fact that Thad Matta, former Ohio State coach, and before that he was at he coached at Butler as well as Xavier. that IU. There were reports earlier in the week that they had basically decided to go with him, and then he failed a physical, which who knew that coaches took physicals for being hired? But he's had terrible back issues, and seems strange that he would take that job of head coach. But they've instead hired him as an associate athletic director.
Dealing only with basketball.
Dealing only with men's basketball. So that'll help his health situation, I think, a little bit and give him still a chance to be involved in the basketball program. So very curious to see how that pans out.
Yeah. Did you see Mike Woodson's tweet last night?
No.
He said something like this: "Let me introduce myself. I'm 63 years old. I've never coached college basketball before. I'm the right man for the job." That was his pitch.
Yeah. Bold strategy.
Yeah, and has been with the Knicks organization this year and is now leaving.
And he has IU roots.
Yeah.
And that's a big deal to a lot of these blue blood programs. I mean, I get it. Like, and that comes into play in places like Ohio State when it comes to football. Like, that matters that you have some sort of connection to the program, whether as a grad assistant or a player or something, or some sort of coach at some point. That matters at some level. So, in any case, curious to see how that shakes out.
Yeah.
My sense of the IU fan reactions that I know is kind of we'll see.
It seems like anybody other than Archie was going to be there seemed to be a lot of disdain for Archie in his final year.
But there were a lot of how do I put this delicately, deluded IU fans in thinking that Brad Stevens was going to leave the Celtics and come to IU. Stop it.
You don't leave the Celtics.
Stop it. Stop it. That's not going to happen. So, in any case, now that I've offended our IU fans, let's anything from the world of Major League Baseball?
My goodness, season starts this week. Thursday night is opening day. I mean, I'm excited. I'm pumped. It's we didn't get a full season last year. We're getting a full season this year. Knock on wood. The Mets are trying to sign two of their stars to long-term contracts. And they've kind of set the deadline as opening day. So we'll see if Francisco Lindor signs, and we'll see if Michael Conforto signs as well. Okay. So that's what we're watching in Mets world.
Okay. And your 6-week fantasy baseball draft has come to an end?
Yeah, it ended last week. Okay. And we're getting ready for the regular season. Okay. We're gearing up.
And then quickly on your Knicks, how are they doing?
Fourth in the East, 2 games over 500. Now the 8th seed in the East is only 2 games under 500. So
there's a lot of
there's a log jam towards the back. So it could go poorly. Mitchell Robinson broke his foot. So he's our very, very athletic center who had been playing, and he's out for extended time now. So,
all right. So we are recording on the Monday morning of Holy Week, the Monday before Easter, and so we thought that it might be a nice way to mark that occasion by talking through or by reading some key scripture about Jesus' crucifixion, kind of talking through things that kind of catch our attention, as well as his resurrection. So that's our plan of attack for today. But before we do that, John, any Easter traditions or favorite Easter memories for you growing up or even current?
Yeah. So growing up, my parents were not about giving us these big Easter baskets that had all the candies and everything. And so my parents every Easter morning would hide presents throughout the house, and we would go find one big present for ourselves or something that they had bought us for Easter, instead of the traditional big thing of chocolate that we get hopped up on and destroy the house or whatever. We would get – I remember getting hockey pads when I was a kid to play goalie in street hockey or something like that. Something that encouraged activity outdoors and things like that. We would do egg hunts in the afternoon. We go to church and all those things. But that's the piece that's always stuck out to me as a little bit different.
Gotcha.
How about yourself? Anything growing up or you've done with your boys?
Yeah, we did I remember growing up, we would – not every Easter Sunday, but often on Easter Sunday we'd have an Easter egg hunt at my grandparents' house out in their yard. But my parents would always give us we'd get the big basket of candy, and I think even now, even though my sons are almost 23 and almost 20, that they'll get some sort of Easter basket of candy of some kind. One thing that I do remember is when I was involved in our youth group in high school, we would do the sunrise service.
Ooh.
So we're talking like 6 a.m. kind of service on Sunday morning of Easter. And I don't know if they just thought, well, the hardcore people come, but they're not really awake, so we'll throw the youth out there and see what happens. But in some ways, it was an interesting experience. So.
I once went to a church that did a sunrise service with breakfast.
Yeah, we would do breakfast afterwards.
No, I think we did breakfast during.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, so like you would be there and you would eat.
While the service was going on?
Yeah, and it was like a short devotional sorts of things.
Gotcha.
The most important thing was that you were gathering, or at least what felt to me, we were gathering for breakfast,
Sure.
And there was a short devotional about Easter, and then we come together and have a full service.
I see. Okay.
At the normal time.
All right. Yeah.
And I'm a big fan of the breakfast foods. So
I'm a huge fan of the breakfast foods myself. So, but yeah, do you have any big plans for this upcoming Easter?
It's my wife's birthday on Easter Sunday, so we'll be celebrating both the risen Lord and my wife's birthday.
Yeah.
So.
Good stuff. Yeah, we'll be heading to Ohio to see my family. So that'll be nice. But I do think that as we move into this week, getting us off to a good start here with the scripture passages that I think can be familiar to us, and sometimes our familiarity with scripture can actually be counterproductive in the sense that it blinds us to some things that are actually in the text that we maybe don't notice, or just we don't slow down as we read these texts because we're like, oh, yeah, this is the story of this.
Sure. We've become so familiar with it we can glaze over it or pass over it.
Yeah. And side note, this is one of the advantages of working in the original languages. It forces you to slow down.
It does, yeah. And that's one of the things we talk about in Greek quite a bit is like it forces you to see things that maybe you didn't see in the original text.
Absolutely. And so what we're going to do is we'll read obviously each gospel account has its own version of the crucifixion story. So we will just for the sake of, I think, brevity, we've basically chosen the Mark version. So why don't we go ahead and do you want to read the whole thing all at once and just kind of talk through it? Okay.
Yeah, I can do that. Let's see. We're reading Mark 15 21 to 39. Oop. Get my Bible positioned correctly here without knocking over the microphone. All right, so starting in verse 21. And they compelled a passerby, Simon of Cyrene, who was coming in from the country, the father of Alexander and Rufus, to carry his cross. And they brought him to the place of Golgotha, which means place of a skull. And they offered him wine mixed with myrrh, but he did not take it. And they crucified him and divided his garments amongst them, casting lots for them, to decide what each should take. And it was the third hour when they crucified him, and the inscription of the charges against him read, "The King of the Jews." And with him they crucified two robbers, one on his right and one on his left. And those who passed by derided him, waging wagging their heads and saying, "Aha! You who destroyed the temple and rebuild it in 3 days, save yourself and come down from the cross." So also the chief priests with the scribes mocked him to one another, saying, "He saved others, he cannot save himself. Let the Christ, the King of Israel, come down now from the cross, that we may see and believe." Those who were crucified with him also reviled him.
You going to read the rest of the passage there?
Oh, my bad. The paragraph ended. My bad.
No worries. No worries.
And when the 6th hour had come, there was darkness over the whole land until the 9th hour. And at the 9th hour, Jesus cried with a loud voice, "Eloi, Eloi, lema sabachthani," which means, my God, why have you forsaken me?" And some of the bystanders, hearing it, said, "Behold, he is calling to Elijah." And someone ran and filled a sponge with sour wine, put it on a reed and gave it to him to drink, saying, "Wait, let us see whether Elijah will come down to take him." And Jesus uttered a loud cry and breathed his last. And the curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. And when the centurion who stood facing him saw that in this way he breathed his last, he said, "Truly, this man was the Son of God."
Okay. So obviously this passage is incredibly rich. We're not going to even pretend that we will hit all the key points or even many of the key points, but just wanted to pull out some things that I think are worth calling attention to and reflecting on, and some of more kind of historical note versus theological. But when you start that passage, it is interesting that Mark goes out of his way to name.
He does, yes. I was noticing that as I was reading that he named Simon.
And that he goes on to say he was the father of Alexander and Rufus.
Is it a fair assumption to make that these are people in the early church that the readers would have been familiar with?
Yeah, I think that I'm hard-pressed to come up with another explanation as to why Mark would identify these people unless he expected at least a chunk of his readers to go, "Oh, yeah, Alexander and Rufus. Yeah, we know those guys. Their dad was the one that carried Jesus' cross." Mm-hmm. So that makes sense to me. And I will suggest to you also that it's one of those indirect indicators of how the gospel writers relied on eyewitness testimony when it comes to their recounting their versions of what happened. That it's not just relying strictly necessarily on tradition, so to speak, but that they more so even Luke, I think, went out of their way to talk to eyewitnesses of these things.
Sure, and base it in history.
Yeah, absolutely. What are some things that grabbed you?
My goodness. Well, the first thing is that there's something in there that's neither Greek nor English.
Yes.
That one of those things where as you're reading, you go, "Oh my goodness, how do I pronounce this?" And you go, "I just got to fake it till I make it here."
Yep, totally.
What do you make of that, and why is it not translated for us?
Yeah, so that's you're talking about what happens there in verse what is that there? That's
34.
34, yeah. When Jesus cries out, "Eloi, Eloi, lema sabachthani." That's Aramaic, a sort of just direct attempt in English to render what are the Aramaic words. So not translate them, but essentially transliterate them.
Yeah.
And that is the first line of Psalm 22, verse 1. And so in Aramaic, not in Hebrew, but in Aramaic, which, my God, why have you forsaken me? So I think the reason that translations keep the Aramaic equivalent is because that's in essence what the Greek does. They, instead of translating it in Greek, it's just they do the same thing of transliterating. Here's how you write this in Greek, the sounds that are made in Aramaic. But I think it also helps explain the actions of the crowd. They mistake when Jesus says Eloi, Eloi, they think he's saying Elijah, and which is why they then say, wait a minute, let's see if Elijah comes and brings him down from the cross.
Yeah.
When in fact he's saying Eli, which is my God, El being the Hebrew and Aramaic one of the words for God. So my God, they mistakenly hear him as saying Elijah, a shortened version of Elijah's name.
Sure. Interesting. Now, I've read about this reference to Psalm 22, the first line. There are some scholars who would say, and I don't think I know your opinion about this. There are some scholars who would say he's reading the first line, and that's supposed to be representative of Jesus reciting the whole psalm here on the cross. Thoughts? Is that something you would like? It's a possibility. It absolutely happened. No, this is exactly what was said. Like, where do you fall in that?
Well, I don't know that. I'm hesitant to say that Jesus recited that whole psalm on the cross because I just don't think. I mean, that seems like a jump to me.
Okay.
However, it is very evident that Mark's account and the other gospel writers as well, they are borrowing language from Psalm 22 to describe the crucifixion. So you see it not just in him actually quoting that first line, but in verse 24 when it says that they divided his garments among them, casting lots for them to decide what each should take. That's picking up language from Psalm 22:18. And then when it describes in verse 29, those who passed by derided him, wagging their heads and saying, so that's language borrowed from Psalm 22:7. So it's pretty apparent that Mark is helping the reader to see that Psalm 22 forms an important backdrop to what's happening here. And so that psalm is a psalm of David where he's talking about his suffering at the hands of evil opponents.
Yeah, and so it's providing a bit of color and backdrop to the crucifixion that we're having here.
Yeah, and I think that it's also helping you to see, when you understand David as the king, that this is part of the way that he is presenting he's presenting Jesus as the promised Davidic king.
Interesting. Okay, one other thing in there. What do you make of the veil being torn in that moment? It says, and it specifically mentions it from top to bottom, not bottom to top.
Right.
What do you make of that, and why is that significant?
Right. So that veil is what separated the holy place from the Holy of Holies. So inside the temple itself, where only the priests could go, right? Only the priests could go into the main temple area. And then only the high priest once a year could go into the Holy of Holies, where the Ark of the Covenant was supposed to be. And so that veil is like crazy thick. I can't remember the specific numbers, but I think it might have been even 2 feet thick.
Wow.
So this is not something that any normal human being obviously is going to just be able to, oops, pulled on it too tightly and it tore.
Yeah.
And the fact that it tore from top to bottom is emphasizing that God is the one who has torn that veil as a picture of now we have access to God through Jesus. That the veil that blocked our access is now torn away and we have access to God through Jesus. I think also I want to point out, this is one of my favorite features of this passage, is there's a lot of irony in here. That he's being crucified as the King of the Jews, and that's what he is.
Yeah.
But they're mocking him as that. And when the religious leaders mock him with, You who would destroy the temple and rebuild it in 3 days, save yourself and come down from the cross. Well, the whole reason he won't save himself is so that he will save us.
Yes.
And
he does do that, right?
Right.
He does accomplish that in his resurrection.
Right. And so it's so striking to see how Mark has intentionally written this to show the irony of these people are actually in some ways making it even more clear about Jesus' identity.
Sure.
So plenty we could talk about there, but I think we probably need to move on to the resurrection account. And again, with the resurrection, obviously – actually, sorry, I want to hit one more thing. On that Mark passage, it is striking that the account of the crucifixion climaxes with a centurion, a Roman centurion, making the climactic declaration.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's a good point.
This truly is the Son of God. So very important observation, I think, there. Let's look at Luke 24 now in terms of the resurrection. Again, each gospel account has its own version of the resurrection account. So we're going to look at Luke 24, and we'll go ahead and read I'll go ahead and read the first 12 verses here to capture the resurrection account.
Okay.
But on the first day of the week, at early dawn, they went to the tomb, taking the spices they had prepared. And they found the stone rolled away from the tomb. But when they went in, they did not find the body of the Lord Jesus. While they were perplexed about this, behold, 2 men stood by them in dazzling apparel. And as they were frightened and bowed their faces to the ground, these men said to them, "Why do you seek the living among the dead? He is not here, but has risen. Remember how he told you while he was still in Galilee that the Son of Man must be delivered into the hands of sinful men and be crucified and on the 3rd day rise?" And they remembered his words. And returning from the tomb, they told all these things to the 11 and to all the rest. Now it was Mary Magdalene and Joanna and Mary the mother of James and the other women with them who told these things to the apostles. But these words seemed to them an idle tale, and they did not believe them. But Peter rose and ran to the tomb. Stooping and looking in, he saw the linen cloths by themselves, and he went home marveling at what had happened. Yeah, so lots we can talk about there. What are some initial observations, John, that catch your attention?
Well, I think the thing that always stands out about this passage to me anytime I read it is the people who are going to the tomb are all women. And female testimony wasn't particularly taken seriously during this day. It wasn't a trusted source.
Not even really allowed, to be honest.
Yeah.
Like it was just not viewed as valid.
And so it does seem important and cultural defying maybe that women were a part of the group that found Jesus' tomb empty originally.
Well, and I think it's also a mark of historical authenticity because if you were scheming to create an account that would be widely believable, you would never pick women in the first century as your first witnesses of this happened, because culturally speaking, that would just be dismissible of oh, come on, women, seriously, just because of the first cultural context.
Sure.
So I think it is both sort of cross-cultural and pushback, but it's also a mark of historical authenticity that if you were going to make this up, you'd never do that because it would undermine your credibility within your contemporary culture.
Interesting. And then of course the apostles don't believe the women when they show up, right?
Yeah.
They're kind of like, you crazy women and your fancy tales,
Right. Yes. And yet part of what endears me to Peter is
he's hopeful.
He's like, if there's a chance they're right.
Yeah.
If there's just a chance that they're right, I got to see. I just have to check it out. Even if I think not likely, he's still like, I got to go. If there's any remote chance that Jesus isn't dead, I got to know.
Yeah.
So
the spices, why are they going to pour spices on a corpse?
Well, it's just ultimately it's a mark of it's a combination of showing honor, but also it's a way of lessening the smell of the deteriorating body.
That would have been my sense. That would have been my guess. But
yeah, so it's interesting too that we won't read the rest of Luke 24, but Luke has arguably the longest presentation of the resurrection, and he has a particular emphasis in telling the resurrection, more so on this point than some other gospel accounts. And I just want to hit this briefly, is that he tells two stories that happen on this day that emphasize that now with the resurrection of Jesus, the key to actually reading the scriptures correctly has been given. Mm-hmm. You've got the story of him encountering the two men on the road to Emmaus, where he basically says, don't you get that the Christ had to suffer? And they don't get it. And so he explains, starting with Moses, all these passages that point towards him. And I would say it's really the totality of the Old Testament, not just cherry-picking specific passages. But also then, later that same night, Jesus appears to the gathered disciples in Jerusalem. Mm-hmm. And he says again, basically, now that the resurrection has happened, this is the key to reading Scripture properly. Yeah. So I think that those two passages in particular are really some of the most important hermeneutical passages that come out of this, out of really the entire Scriptures.
I remember in seminary wrestling with those passages and how important they were for developing how I read the Old Testament.
Yeah. But I think it'd be good for us as we kind of wind this discussion down, as valuable and important as those things are, to not get lost in the academics of it and miss out on the wonder that Jesus was dead and then he was alive. That doesn't happen. That's not something that's just like, oh, well, yeah, duh. And I think sometimes we're so accustomed to, yeah, Jesus rose from the dead. And we miss out on the wonder of he was fully dead.
Yeah.
And the grief and the mourning and the sadness of thinking about, we thought this was the one. We thought he was the promised king, and now he's dead. And now what? Where do we go from here, guys? Like, we were all in with Jesus, and now it's over.
Yeah. And the disciples were clearly still hanging out. They were still together. They weren't. I don't know what they were doing for 3 days, but those 3 days had to be maddening.
Yeah. Yeah. So as we even as we celebrate this week the resurrection of Jesus, and in one sense, of course, every Sunday is a celebration of the resurrection.
Sure.
That's why we gather on Sundays. It's good to take some time to reflect on the wonder of Jesus rising from the dead, and that gives us hope for new life.
Yeah, I don't know if it's a recent phenomenon at our church, but our pastors recently begun to say, thanks for starting your week here. Thanks for being here to start your week. And it's just sort of we often think of, in the modern vernacular, we say the weekend.
Yes.
We think of Saturday and Sunday as sort of the end of the week, but really Sunday is the beginning of the week.
Correct.
And is the remembrance of the resurrection each Sunday at church. Yeah.
Absolutely. So let's talk a couple of resources that could help people out.
Yeah. Anything you'd recommend?
If you are interested in looking at a resource that puts the passages together, all the different passages from the Gospels that kind of map out Jesus' last week before the crucifixion in Jerusalem, Andreas Kostenberger and Justin Taylor wrote a book called The Final Days of Jesus, which is really accessible, readable. Highly recommend that. And then John Piper wrote a book, 50 Reasons Why Jesus Came to Die, reflecting on the necessity of and what the death of Jesus accomplished for us.
Yeah. So that's a classic for
sure. It is. And it's real thin. It's real short.
I think each chapter might be one page.
Yeah,
page or two. Yeah.
So it's real short. really bite-sized, digestible, great to reflect on. So, but we are on episode 65, so we need an athlete.
Yeah, and believe it or not, 65 is not plentiful with stellar top-shelf athletes.
Yeah, we I think underestimated how much we'd struggle in the 60s here, but we're going to press forward because we are professional broadcasters now, and so
I suppose so. Well, I'll go ahead and read through some of these, and maybe you'd like to give comment to a few of them.
Okay.
Erik Karlsson.
Yeah, do you think he's Swedish?
I believe so. And he's a current NHL player, defenseman. Yeah. I'm not even quite sure who for, but
San Jose maybe.
Okay,
I don't know.
Okay, San Jose kind of has a history of being a stellar regular season team that can never put it together in the playoffs. I don't want to offend our San Jose Sharks fans out there.
Careful, there's a large contingent of those.
Our next athlete, Gary Zimmerman.
Yes.
NFL, 84 to 97. He played for quite a bit.
Yeah, I think he was a guard, played for the Vikings and the Broncos. Yep.
Okay. Here's a name. Elvin Bethea. Excuse me.
Yep.
And he was with Houston?
The Oilers.
Yeah, Houston Oilers.
The original Oilers, yes. From 68 to 83, he was a defensive end.
Now the Tennessee Titans.
Yes. And then lastly, for the pros, we have George Katkovicz.
Yeah, there's no way I was going to be able to pronounce that. Yeah.
So
Katkovicz.
He's a bit of a mystery man because one of the sites that I used to come up with our list indicates that I look at is NBA players that wore certain numbers, right? Mm-hmm. So he is listed as having worn 65, but I cannot find a darn thing about him on the internet besides the fact that he was an NBA player that wore 65, like not where he played, nothing. So he's a mystery man.
We don't know when he lived even?
I could not find a Wikipedia page. I couldn't find him in a quick look on NBA.com. So he is our mystery man. Wore the number 65. And then lastly, our Ohio State representative, Pat Elflein, was a guard and then a center for Ohio State from 2012 to 2016, played in their national championship game. Still is in the NFL, I believe. I think at one point he was playing with the Vikings.
Okay.
So, and he won the Remington Trophy in college football, which is given to the best center in college football.
Who do you like?
I might as well just throw him up on the dartboard there, right? And just start. I'm going to skip over Erik Karlsson because I'm sensing that maybe next episode we've got
I think next episode we'll have a
hockey player in strong contention.
I think so.
So, I mean, when stuck with this kind of decision, I either default towards the Ohio State guy or
the obscure,
the most obscure. So, do you have a leaning, John?
I'd be fine going with the Ohio State guy. I'm also okay going with George Mystery Man
Katkovicz. Okay, let's do it. I'm going to go. Let's go with George Katkovicz.
George Katkovicz.
Yeah,
the only NBA player to wear that number, right?
That's my understanding. Yeah.
Wow.
So anyway, we'll have to see if maybe some of our listeners could crowdsource this for us and
could do some research for us.
Yeah. So anyway, we are on to one thing you liked.
Yeah. So this Sunday, my wife got baptized. So that was very exciting for us. And one thing that's come about since being married is I am a crying mess all the time, and so I am just in the back row at church, just crying my eyes out that my wife is getting baptized. So,
yeah, that was a fun moment to see yesterday.
Yeah.
So glad to see that happening, and just to clarify, she's been a believer for a long time.
Yeah. But was when she was born into a Lutheran congregation, was baptized as a baby, and I think has been feeling the need to get baptized ever since joining Believers Baptist Church, which she did in high school. So,
yeah, and that is a requirement at our church, at Christ Covenant Church. You have to be baptized in order to be a member and baptized as a believer's baptism. So there we go. My one thing I liked is somewhat related in the fact that I preached the last 2 Sundays at CCC.
Okay.
So it was a great privilege to preach through 2 Corinthians chapter 3. Previous week was verses 1 to 6. This week was verses 7 through 18. A lot of fun to be able to preach on a baptism Sunday, and knowing that there would be a decent number of family and relatives and friends and such that were there who weren't believers. It was a treat to know that there would be a decent number of unbelievers in the crowd that morning to be able to preach the gospel clearly to them.
Very cool. Yeah, it was wonderful to sit under your preaching for a couple of weeks.
Yeah. So, well, we have talked March Madness. We've talked the crucifixion and resurrection. We've talked about several athletes we'd never heard of before.
That's right. Yep.
And we have talked about how much we enjoy participating in our local church.
Mm-hmm. And the Suez Canal, don't forget.
I did forget the Suez Canal.
We did talk some Suez Canal.
Hopefully by next week we'll have cleared that up and gotten
it's been
global trade fixed.
Well, it was partially loosened this morning. That was the big news this morning, is it's been knocked loose.
Okay. The WD-40 has taken its effect there?
And apparently a full moon is coming up, and that's going to rise the tides.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. Hope springs eternal
Hot
in the Suez Canal.
From John Sloat. You are our global trade and canal correspondent.
That's right.
For the program. So
me and Twitter. Yep.
Yes, that's right. Well, I think there should be little doubt that we have covered our various and sundry topics, and we are ready to call mission accomplished.
I think so.
Meaning that all that is left to say at this point is, the Lord bless y'all real good.
Later.